Hello and welcome to Midnight Sleep Scientist, a quiet harbour for curious hearts at the edge of sleep. Settle in as you are, perhaps on your side, perhaps with a blanket you've known for years. Let your jaw unhook, the shoulders lower by a finger's width, and the breath soften until it feels like a small tide you scarcely notice. Outside, night leans over the roof, cool and generous. If you listen closely, the world has a hush, like pine needles after rain, a faint hush like snow falling far away. Tonight we drift toward a kind of star that wears danger like a crown, Magnetars, city-sized remnants with magnetic fields so intense they could, in theory, rearrange the way atoms behave. We won't rush. We'll walk a slow shoreline of ideas, letting the foam curl and fade around our ankles before the next wave arrives. Along the way we'll meet storms that travel as light, quakes that ripple in a crust of iron-dense lattice, and a magnetism that turns space itself into a kind of glass. We will hold these things lightly, as one might hold a pocket watch and listen, then let the ticking grow fainter as the mind drifts outward. There will be moments of awe, yes, but always followed by warmth, by distance, by the reassurance that the most dangerous stars are also some of the farthest. Their tempests arrive to us as whispers, like the brief sweep of a lighthouse beam sliding past a sleeping bay. You may find yourself drifting mid-sentence. That's welcome. If you're still awake later, feel free to share where you're listening from tonight. A city window, a countryside porch, a bunk on a long journey. For now, we dim the lamps, look up, and begin. The room is dark but not empty. It holds the memory of day like a seashell keeps the sea. Somewhere beyond your walls, the sky spreads its patient fossil light across the planet's curve. Constellations look steady, but they are not. They are a choir that never stops breathing. Each voice arriving on a different delay. We have always named these patterns to soothe ourselves. Hunter, swan, scorpion. Stringing human stories between stars whose distances are measured in thought rather than miles. Imagine now that among those lights almost never naked eye, there exist remnants of immense stars that died in a controlled collapse, leaving behind hearts that did not learn how to stop. In the quiet aftermath, the core, once the size of a sun, squeezes itself down until a city could be traced across its equator. That compressed core is a neutron star. Some of these strangers are unusually magnetic, Magnetars, and it is their magnetism that makes them feel, from here, like dangerous myths that actually came true. Danger, in astronomy, is a word that travels with a chaperone named distance. A lighthouse lamp could blind you up close, yet save you from reefs across a stormy channel. Magnetars fit this paradox. Their fields may be as if all the compasses of Earth were stacked upon one another into a tower that climbs past the moon, and still, for us, the beam arrives as faint news carried by photons that have grown old and polite in transit. The universe is wide. Our worry may rest. If you like, you can picture a magnetar as a dark pearl hung in a cage of invisible lines. The lines are magnetic field lines, threads of influence, looping from one hemisphere to the other, arcing above the surface and diving through it again, tangled and twisted as if a cat's cradle were wound in firelight. Space near such a star might not behave entirely like the space you know. In fields so strong, light itself is persuaded to act in unusual ways. The vacuum, which we imagine as empty, could become birefringent, slightly glassy, giving different polarizations of light, different paths, like two violin notes passing through a mist and bending apart. It sounds like myth, but it is a patient frontier of physics, approached by careful instruments and careful doubt. We'll come to the instruments and the doubts later. For now we are outside, under the old star map, the hush of our own planet around us. A breeze carries the resin-sweet scent of pines, and the air has that far, iron tang night sometimes brings near the sea. You look up, and the mind traces the slow sweep of the Milky Way like chalk dust across a velvet curtain. Somewhere in that broad brush stroke, in a spiral arm not so unlike ours, there may be a magnetar turning. It turns slowly by neutron star standards, once every few seconds perhaps, like a watch hand on a clock that measures storms. What is dangerous about a magnetar is not only the field but the way that field stores stress. Fields can twist, crusts can crack. When the twist becomes too much, the star may snap into a slightly different arrangement. In that moment, the star speaks. The language is gamma rays and X-rays, short high notes that ring out and wash over space. We do not hear sound in vacuum, but if we could, perhaps the after vibration would feel like a bell struck not with a hammer but with a thought. And yet, even this violence is local. The space between us and such a star is a deep ocean of emptiness. By the time the ripple reaches our planet, it has become a moth's footfall. Instruments on satellites notice and write small timestamps. The ground does not tremble. The water in your glass does not quiver. The only thing that shifts, quietly, is our understanding. It is a safe way to learn about ferocity. The word magnetar carries a remembrance of origin. It is a portmanteau of magnetic and star. First summoned to name a hypothesis that certain soft bursts of high-energy light seen in our detectors were not the flickers of something nearby, like solar flares misread, but the distant news of something newly fierce. Over time, evidence gathered as tidily as snow on a windowsill. Some neutron stars showed spin periods that slowed in a way that suggested extreme magnetic braking. Others flared in patterns that seemed to match the stresses of a twisted magnetosphere. As catalogues grew, the category took shape. We were not alone with our old stars and our young. We had these young old things too, born from dying, loud in silence. If you have ever slept in a cabin and woken to the soft green of an aurora, you know the feeling of a magnetic storm translated into poetry. Earth's magnetic field, modest and home-shaped, catches charged particles and tugs them into flowing curtains of light. A magnetar's field would reshape that entire scene, teasing apart atoms, flattening electron clouds until chemistry itself would stutter. This is a thought experiment, a way to sense the scale. We keep a respectful distance. Our auroras remain, our lighthouse beam remains slow and tender, sliding along the horizon. What sets the scene for the rest of our journey is this gentle double image, the star with the strength to unbraid matter, and the distance that turns its tantrums into lullabies. Over the next hours we'll walk closer by imagination. We'll step back when needed. We'll hold words like perhaps, and it seems in our pockets. Like small seashells we turn with our thumbs to remember humility. Science is a craft of candlelight in a drafty hall, flames cupped by hands that know they are not the sun. Magnetars ask us to cup those flames and look toward a city-sized darkness that shines in bands our eyes cannot see. If a magnetar were somehow placed where our sun sits, an impossible arrangement that we mention only to taste the idea, the night would become dangerous in an immediate way. But the cosmos has not done that. The most famous flares we have recorded came from thousands of light years away, even hundreds of thousands. When those events brushed past Earth, the atmosphere briefly adjusted. Instruments chirped. A few particles at great heights rambled off course, and then the sky returned to its habits. The pocket watch kept ticking, softer with distance, regular as sleep. You might imagine, as you settle a little deeper into your pillow or the gentle hollow of your shoulder, that somewhere a magnetar's light is already on its way. It left before your grandparents were born. It will arrive after your grandchildren have grown. The beam that will one evening touch someone's detector is already threaded through the spaces between stars like a strand of silk stretched across miles of dark water. We are part of this patient exchange. Even while we rest, the universe continues, unbothered by our closed eyes. There is a story that when we look up, we see the past. Tonight we also listen for it. The past is not done speaking. It hisses and rings. It releases pressure in little syllables of light. It sometimes erupts into a giant flare and then sighs for a long, long time. To us, those syllables are brief, less than a heartbeat, then forgotten by the instruments and folded into tables and charts. But we can ask what kind of world could produce them. We can trace back to a star too heavy for its own lightness, a core that could not support itself, a collapse that didn't shatter but refined, condensed, clarified until neutrons, once shy of crowds, accepted an intimacy beyond ordinary matter. That is the neutron star. The magnetar is an accent on that word, a tilt of the head that says, listen again. You can linger here a moment, with the night pressing gently at the window panes, with the thought of a city-sized star turning somewhere in the dark. It turns the way you might turn a page, without hurry. Each rotation lets the magnetic pattern rearrange just a little, each spin losing a whisper of energy. The way a top slows, very gradually, the star becomes less fierce. It is a story of aging, written in the units of light. We will read more lines soon. For now, notice how your breath has become something you barely have to do. Notice how even the words dangerous star have softened, cushioned by distance and the untroubled calm of your room. Somewhere, faint as a dream, a lighthouse beam slides past and is gone. The pocket watch ticks once and again, kinder and quieter. You are safe under your roof, beneath safe stars. We will move on, slowly, to how such a star is made. Before a magnetar, there was a giant. Imagine a star several times the mass of our sun, blue-white, impatient, spending its fuel as if time were a crowded theatre and the curtain had already begun to fall. Such stars live brief, brilliant lives. In their hearts, hydrogen learns to be helium, then heavier elements, each new stage like a key, slid into a new lock. The core thickens with ash, layer upon layer. The star's interior becomes an onion of fires, hotter within, cooler without, until there is an iron heart that cannot give more. Iron is a closed door for fusion. Pushing past it costs more energy than it yields. When the engine reaches that door, the balance that held the star up, outward pressure from heat against inward pull from gravity, can falter in an instant. Gravity remembers itself. The core, no longer buoyed by fresh fusion, begins to fall inward. It is a quiet catastrophe, as if the entire ballroom floor suddenly remembered it was a puddle and tried to become small again. Electrons are pressed into protons, neutrinos, elusive and nearly untouchable, spill outward by the staggering trillions. In many cases, a shockwave plows through the outer layers, unbinding the star in a supernova, an outward thrown blossom of light and matter that can for a while outshine the galaxy that hosts it. In that center, what remains is a heart of almost pure neutron matter, halted from further collapse by quantum rules that act like a kind of firmness, a stiffness in the crowd. A neutron star is born. Not every neutron star is a magnetar. The difference, according to the best stories we have, stories woven from equations, from observations, and from the firm hum of suspicion, is in the birth's choreography. If the collapsing core spins swiftly, if turbulent motion roils like water in a pot coming to boil, if certain instabilities grow as the star is pressed into a volume scarcely wider than a city, then a magnetic dynamo can amplify the field in a heartbeat. Imagine the weak field of the progenitor star being fed through the rollers of a printing press, over and over, each pass doubling until the ink is heavy on the page. What was once modest becomes overwhelming. The newborn neutron star may carry a field we call magnetar strong. There are other avenues. Two neutron stars might merge, making for a brief, furious storm of space-time ripples and nuclear alchemy. In the shuddering seconds after the union, the remnant, if it does not collapse at once, could wind its own field to impossible intensity. In some rare supernovae, magnetar engines may even help power the light curve, keeping the flower luminous longer than it otherwise would be. We speak with caution. Observations suggest, models propose, new instruments arrive like kinder eyes and tell us when we guessed well and when we merely guessed. Consider the newborn object, 20 kilometers across, maybe a little more, with a surface so dense that a teaspoon would weigh as much as a mountain. The image is almost too bright for bedtime, so we shade it. We say, the crust is like iron-hard ice. Beneath is a sea of neutrons that behaves at these pressures like a superfluid, a state where viscosity seems to fall away and the fluid moves without friction. Closer to the core, matter may arrange itself into strange, pretty-sounding phases. Lasagna, spaghetti, gnocchi, names that physicists borrowed in a moment of levity to describe nuclear pasta patterns of nucleons arranged by pressing forces into sheets, rods, blobs. These are metaphors, but they help our hands find holes. Through this layered star threads, the magnetic field. At birth, it has a shape similar to the familiar dipole, a north and a south. Yet birth is not a still life. The field twists and braids as the crust cools and shrinks slightly, as the interior settles, as trapped magnetic stresses look for release. Crust and field converse in a language of strain. The solid tries to hold, the magnetic lines insist, seeking a lower energy shape. Sometimes the crust yields abruptly, a starquake, and the magnetic configuration jumps closer to comfort. In that jump, light is made, but light is only the messenger. The making, like most makings, is slower, over thousands to tens of thousands of years, a blink by galactic clocks, but the length of a civilization by hours. The magnetar gradually sheds its field's fury. It spins down from perhaps 2 or 3 turns per second to 1, then slower. The pulses soften, the bursts grow rare. It might settle into the quieter company of more ordinary neutron stars, or perhaps the field decays in patterns not yet clear, leaving behind an object that would look to us like a waning ember we misfile in our catalogues. We will return to this arc of aging later, when night is deeper and the house is stiller. For now, let us sit at the nursery door, in the star-forming regions of a galaxy, the loose blue neighborhoods where gas is plentiful, and gravity has not yet written all its decisions. Massive stars are born, they live far, they die nearby on the cosmic map, because they do not have time to drift far from home. That is why magnetars are often found in such regions, amid the leftover threads of nebulae, not far from other young objects. If you could float there, you might see light caught in dust like a lamp in gauze. You might feel the fuzz of radiation on your skin like warmth from a far hearth. You would also be destroyed in an instant, so we do not float there. We only look from a great remove, which turns violence into color, danger into spectacle. The making of a magnetar is not only a tale of birth shocks and dynamos, it is also a tale of what does not happen. The core does not, for example, continue to collapse into a black hole, at least not immediately. There is a narrow window of mass and pressure, where neutron degeneracy pressure can resist gravity's pull. Too little mass at birth and you have a less dramatic remnant. Too much and gravity wins outright. Somewhere in between lies the country where magnetars can exist. The map is still being drawn. Each new measurement of a neutron star's mass and radius scribbles another contour line. As you listen, notice how the unknowns do not disturb sleep, but cocoon it. Not knowing has texture. It gives the mind a soft surface to rest against. The way a down quilt settles across the knees. We say perhaps the dynamo works like this. Perhaps there are multiple kinds of magnetar births. Some in the quiet aftermath of single stars, some in the brief bright chaos of mergers. Perhaps different materials in the crust make different styles of quakes, like different woods that ring at different notes. Perhaps the interior superfluid stores rotational energy, the way a hidden spring stores tension, to be released later as a glitch, a tiny jump in the star's spin. We hold these perhapses as one holds the handrail in a darkened theatre, letting the palm glide along without needing to see each step. There is a human echo here. We also arrive in this world with inherited spins, with fields invisible to others, with stresses wound into our early structure that only later find a way to release. We are not stars, but the parallel is tender. In both cases, time and environment decide which strengths become harmonies and which require careful tending. A magnetar built by an especially potent dynamo may sing loudly at first, and then learn quiet. Another might keep its storms longer, snapping and sighing until it has braided itself into a more settled shape. We too learn to twist and untwist. You might wonder whether all this can be measured, or if we are leafing through a storybook by candlelight. The answer arrives in little stamps of certainty scattered across a page of poetry. We measure pulses in X-rays and gamma rays. We time the turn of the star, then time it again months later, and again years later, and watch the slowing. We catch outbursts and list them, giving them dates like pearls on a string. We watch polarization and compare it to models of how light should behave in a strong magnetic field. We look for the company these stars keep: young clusters, nebulae, traces of supernova shells. Each observation is a leaf, and the pile of leaves becomes a bed that carries the weight of an explanation without complaint. So, the making of a magnetar. A massive star burns through its story. The core collapses. The newborn remnant finds a spin in a field. The field is amplified by motion that behaves like a dynamo in a storm. The crust and magnetosphere settle into a restless truce. This is the sketch. The painting is more subtle, oils blended at the edges, colors leaning into one another. As your breath smooths into longer strokes, you can sense the colors without needing the edges. What matters for us is the feeling of the arc. Something huge becomes small. Something quiet inside becomes loud. But at a safe distance, the universe rehearses extremes so that we might learn the middle. In the morning, if you remember anything, you may remember only an image. A blue-white giant laying down its brightness. A core thickening into iron. A moment where gravity clears its throat. And then a city-sized star cradled in invisible wires, like a spider's egg in dew. It is a delicate, dangerous thing, and it exists very far away, and it is fine to let it be far. Outside, if night still has you, perhaps there is the faintest wisp of aurora, a smear so pale you might be making it up. Or perhaps there is only the steady dark, pine-scented and calm. The lighthouse beam turns again somewhere offshore, leafing briefly through a chapter of sea and then closing the book. The pocket watch tucked in your mind's palm ticks on, each second a soft footstep in snow. In the next breath we will stand closer to the star's surface, to the crust, the superfluid heart, and the magnetic cathedral that rises above it, and we will do so without strain. For now, let the origin story drift towards sleep, like embers lifting from a campfire and going out among the trees. The dangerous star has been born. We will visit it gently and we will return home even more gently. Imagine standing on a coastline at dusk, the sea turning to pewter, the horizon a thin, patient line. Now fold that horizon until it circles a single town, and place in the center of that circle a heart that once powered a sun. That is the scale we carry in our hands tonight. A star the size of a city, dense enough that a teaspoon of it would outweigh mountains, quiet enough that its loudest sounds arrive to us as a hush. Beneath the crust, the world turns unfamiliar. Electrons and protons, ever practical in ordinary matter, have been coaxed into new arrangements by pressure's insistence. Neutrons, shy loners at earthly densities, become the crowd. The material behaves like a superfluid, a state that sounds like science fiction until it simply becomes the least catchy description of reality at these extremes. Friction in such a sea is not what you expect. Vortices, tiny whirlpools that carry the star's rotation like threads spool and unspool. They can catch on the crust above, pinning for a while, then release in a sudden unison that makes the star's spin jump a hair's breadth. We call it a glitch, an unassuming word for a choreographed shrug inside a city-sized bell. We start at the surface, though surface is a forgiving word here. This boundary is not a beach where waves taper into foam. It is more like the skin of a bell, a thin, rigid lattice of nuclei and electrons packed so tightly that ordinary metaphors creak. People who study such things speak of an iron-like crust, a crystal forged from pressure rather than from time. It may be only a kilometer or two deep, a shell compared to the star's whole, but its strength is astonishing, strong enough to hold mountains no taller than a house perhaps, because gravity presses everything flat. The word mountain shrinks here. Even so, that crust stores stress the way an old oak stores wind, bending, resisting, and sometimes letting go. Deeper still, near the core, the matter may settle into shapes named with a smile. Lasagna, spaghetti, gnocchi, the nuclear pasta phases. These are not food so much as analogies for patterns. Sheets, rods, droplets of nucleons, arranged by the tug of war between nuclear forces and relentless compression. Picture a gallery of sculptures made of the smallest bricks, all pressed together until art becomes geometry. We cannot visit that gallery, but models let us wander its halls in thought. The feel of it is organized, as if pressure breeds tidiness. The magnetosphere reaches far beyond the star, but not endlessly. It fades into the general sea of interstellar fields and particles. Close in, where the lines are strongest, they corral an atmosphere of charged pairs, that flicker in and out of existence. Drawn into being by the energy stored in the field, the particles rush along, aligned, like snow in a wind that has chosen one direction and refuses to change. When the crust flexes, the field lines can twist, and those twists travel outward as waves, magnetic rumblings that reshape the magnetosphere's weather until it settles again. Threaded through all this is magnetism, not as soft as a refrigerator magnet, not as dramatic as lightning, but as a pervasive law. The star's magnetic field is both architecture and weather architecture, because the field lines anchor in the crust, threading through the interior in loops that define how stress collects. Weather, because above the surface the field swells into a magnetosphere, an invisible cathedral of lines along which particles stream, mirror and return, a dome of rules etched on space itself. If you could see those lines, they might look like auroral curtains without color, lifting and falling, braided and sometimes knotted. Between those outbursts, the magnetar is not idle. It turns one rotation every few seconds, not fast by pulsar standards, but steady. Each turn sweeps its field through space and whispers away a little energy. The slowing is slow by our lives, swift by a star's. We learn the star's heartbeat by listening without touching, and then listening again later. Over months and years, we notice the drift. The pocket watch in our palm ticks a bit more slowly. From that drift we infer the presence of the giant machine, the field functioning as a brake, the unseen superfluid as a secret reservoir, the crust as a ledger that occasionally marks a sudden payment. Back at the crust we attend to the idea of a starquake. You might think of the cracking of lake ice in late winter, a soundless fissure at first, then a sudden clean report that passes through the night like a splinter of light. In a magnetar, the lattice can hold against immense magnetic stresses until it cannot. A patch gives way. The crust slips by a whisper of a centimeter, but on a body this dense, threaded with such fierce fields, even that whisper can trigger a cascade. Magnetic lines jump to a new arrangement. Tap-tight loops unwind. Energy long stored as strain is released, most of it as high-energy light. The star rings. For a minute, sometimes less, the universe learns that this tiny world has changed its mind. Does this picture stand? Or is it a collage pinned together by hope? It stands enough to hold our weight tonight. Instruments have caught the pulses. Outbursts have written their dates onto our calendars. Timing has yielded slowing rates that suggest magnetic braking at intensities we would not otherwise dare to propose. Polarization has begun to reveal how light behaves after crossing the field's more glassy regions. Each piece is partial. Together they feel coherent. The star that is a city, the crust that is a bell, the sea that is superfluid, the field that is a cathedral. These are metaphors, but they trace real things, and when the flare is over, the field resettles, the magnetosphere's weather clears, the crust holds again. The star continues to cool, very slowly, shedding a little energy, smoothing a little stress, like a mountain range softened by rain over unimaginable seasons. Perhaps it will flare again next year, perhaps not for a decade, perhaps never again in a way we will notice. We are patient by necessity. The star does not hurry for us. Here is a smaller picture to place in your pocket, something you can hold even as sleep slides nearer. Imagine a drop of rain on a window. Gravity draws it down, surface tension holds it in a fragile shape. The scenery beyond blurs through the lens. Now replace the rain with a patch of the magnetar's crust. Gravity with magnetism's pull on tangled lines. Surface tension with the lattice's reluctant strength. A slow strain grows, then the drop suddenly runs. The view changes. The pressure eases. The light that announces the change takes the long road across space to find us. What began as a tiny rearrangement on a star becomes, thousands of years later, a brief flare in our detectors, a cause and an effect with eons of quiet between them. That is the tempo of this city-sized heart. It helps, sometimes, to compare to ordinary neutron stars, the ones we've known longer as pulsars. Many pulsars spin quickly, dozens or hundreds of times per second, their beams like sewing needles stitching the dark. Their magnetic fields are strong, yes, but they are manageable by comparison. Magnetars slow themselves faster because their fields act like a firm hand on the flywheel. Magnetars burst more often, brief soft flares instead of a lifetime of regular pulses alone. The family resemblance remains. The differences, like unexpected traits in a cousin, make us look closer and care more. If your eyes happen to close here, you will not miss anything. The star will keep turning, and all the while your own room will tend to its smaller physics. The cool drift along the floor, the warm pocket in your blankets, the small creak of wood as it gives a millimeter and then returns. The great and the intimate share laws, and they share a mood. Both prefer balance. Both forgive small perturbations. Both, after a brief rearrangement, find their way back to quiet. Before we leave this chapter, step out with me once more to the shoreline of metaphor. The sea is dark now, the sky darker still, and far off you can barely see the lighthouse beam making its round steady as a pulse. A magnetar is a kind of lighthouse, though its beam may not be for us, and its rounds are counted in seconds, and its light is not for eyes. What we receive is the reminder that even the most concentrated ferocity can be contained, bounded by rules, and softened by distance. We can hold the whole in a single breath, in and out, and let it. If you have ever held a compass and watched the needle settle, you know the feeling of quiet persuasion. The earth whispers north into a sliver of metal, and the metal listens. Now consider a field that could command not just one needle, not just 1,000, but if one were to imagine 10 trillion compasses laid end to end, each one certain, each one aligned. This is too many compasses, of course. But the phrase carries the mood. A magnetar's field is authority delivered without noise. Where does such a field begin? The simplest picture is a dipole, like a bar magnet threaded through the star, with a north and a south. Lines arc out of one hemisphere, loop through space, and plunge back into the other. Near the surface they are tightly bundled, like taut harp strings. Farther out they spread, their density thinning until what is magnetar gives way to what is galaxy. That is the architecture. But simplicity is a courtesy extended to the beginner. Real magnetars likely carry, beneath the polite dipole, layers of more complex structure, toroidal wraps and knotted threads that hold hidden energy and decide how and when stress is released. The field is not merely a static sculpture. It is a dynamic conversation between interior and exterior. The crust cools and tries to shrink a little. The field resists or assists, depending on how lines are arranged. Currents in the crust can drift, changing the pattern over years. Sometimes the resulting stress is bled away quietly. Sometimes it accumulates and then fails, all at once, as a quake. Above the surface, those changes send waves along the lines. Alven waves, if we name them, rippling out, stirring the magnetosphere's plasma air, and in certain circumstances igniting a flare, like wind through a forest. Most breezes pass without spectacle. Now and then branches crack, and the clearing glows. Under such intensity, even light forgets itself a little. In ordinary emptiness, a photon travels a straight path with a steady character. Near a magnetar, the vacuum is not quite empty. Quantum fields seethe, and the magnetic field's presence can make the space itself act like a crystal, selecting for one polarization over another. The term that visits here is vacuum birefringence, the tendency for different polarizations of light to take slightly different routes or to emerge with different phases, as if space were a pair of spectacles the photon must wear. We cannot feel this with our skin, we cannot see it with our eyes, but instruments can perhaps notice the subtle signatures in polarized light from around such stars, and from those signatures infer the pressure of the field. There are other tricks of the strong field stage. Photon splitting. Two high-energy photons born together from one may be encouraged here, an effect that sifts the spectrum of a flare, softening its brightest edge. Again, we hold the word perhaps softly. These are regimes where our equations, tested in laboratories with magnets we can tame, extend themselves by faith into arenas we cannot visit. Part of the work is humility, part is careful listening, part is the readiness to admit when the sky suggests an edit. It helps to speak of numbers only as weather reports. Read once and set aside, A magnetar's field might be many orders stronger than that of a typical pulsar. It might be enough to wrinkle the shapes of atoms, stretching electron clouds into ovals like raindrops in a wind. It might be huge enough that, were you able to stand with a magnet in your pocket at a safe distance which you could not, the magnet would feel the persuasion of the star even across vast emptiness. The figures are large enough to rattle wakefulness, so we treat them as we treat a thunderstorm far offshore. We note the flashes and then turn back to our book. What then is the distinction between a magnetar and its quieter cousin, the ordinary pulsar? The difference might be framed as one of temperament and age. Pulsars are metronomes. Their beams, whatever the exact mechanism that paints them, sweep past with remarkable regularity. Magnetars, by contrast, live in a kind of tense poise. Their magnetospheres are trapped in shapes that do not quite fit. Their crusts obliged to hold patterns that shift with cooling and time. They too can pulse, but their rhythm is promiscuous with interruptions. A burst here, an outburst there, a period of enhanced emission, then a return to quiet. A magnetar may be a pulsar in a mood, or perhaps a pulsar is a magnetar retired and content. The kinship remains, the path differs. Consider the field lines themselves. You can picture them not as lines at all, but as nearly invisible rails that guide motion. Charged particles, electrons and positrons, tie themselves to these rails and stream along them, reflecting between mirror points near the star's surface where the field tightens. When the lines are twisted, particles collide and radiate, converting the stored magnetic stress into light. Untwisting is cooling in a sense, a way for the system to relax. Retwisting begins again as interior drifts and currents rebuild complexity. The cycle is quiet most of the time, like tides. Flares are the king tides, brief, higher, startling, and then gone. Polarity matters too. A field can be arranged with a dominant dipole direction, but patches of opposite polarity can be trapped beneath the surface, like eddies in a river that mostly flows one way. If such a patch moves or emerges, it can rearrange the magnetosphere's whole mood. Think of a single musician changing key in the orchestra, after a moment of surprise, finding a new harmony. The light curve of an outburst, the afterglow, the way the pulses look in the days after, these are the score by which we infer the change in key. On the edge of hearing lies another possibility, that the field inside the star couples to the solid crust and the superfluid heart in ways that can set up global oscillations. After some giant flares, careful analysis has found quasi-periodic oscillations, faint chimes with irregular spacing that fade over minutes. One interpretation is that these are magnetic strings ringing with the whole star as the sounding board. If true, such music would be more than beautiful. It would offer asteroseismology, star-quake seismology, as a way to learn about interior strength, thickness, and field structure, even if the interpretation proves tangled. The idea itself is a lullaby, the universe humming to itself, and us overhearing one stanza. We should also admit the ordinary. Not every magnetar is in performance at all times. Many are quiet for long stretches, emitting only steady X-rays as heat and field decay leak outward. If you were to sit with a detector tuned to those energies, you would record a soft glow. The field is still there, the 10 trillion compasses still aligned, but without a storm there is no spectacle, only a sustained persuasion of the space nearby. The absence of drama is not absence of depth. You might carry a human echo here as well. We too live with fields of attention, of habit, of care that quietly organize our days. We rarely notice them until they twist. Then we feel the stress gather. Then we make a small change. Then the light of our lives looks different for a while. Magnetars make this psychological weather literal. They convert stored tension into radiance and then rediscover balance. Perhaps that is why thinking of them can be soothing. They remind us that even the strongest persuasion in nature prefers equilibrium, and that upsets, when they come, are brief. As we ease toward the close of this chapter, let a simple scene appear: a table by a window, a cheap brass compass resting on a map, the needle searching and settling. As you rotate the case under your fingertip, north is there, whether you look or not. The needle wakes to it. In the background, the kettle gives a small cluck as it cools. Somewhere unimaginably far, a Magnetar's field has just untwisted a fraction, releasing a spoonful of stored strain as a handful of high-energy photons. Those photons begin their long cross-country walk through the dark. Years hence, an instrument will notice. A line will be added to a log. Someone will read it in a quiet office and nod. Between your table and that star lies the safety of distance, the safety of scale, the safety of a universe that is both fierce and patient. 10 trillion compasses, if we could lay them down, would nod together and then rest. Your heart, if you listen now, does a similar thing. A beat and a pause. A beat and a pause, finding its alignment in a room that has grown softer since we began. In the next part of our journey, we will step into the storms themselves. The brief, bright syllables Magnetars speak when their crusts slip and their fields rearrange. We will approach the flares, the bursts, the ringing after, with the same quiet the sea uses when it receives the moon's pull and decides gently to lift. For now, the compass on the table is still. The night beyond the window is kindly, and the north in your own life knows where it is. There are nights when the sea looks flat from shore, a sheet of pewter laid carefully on a table, but underneath, subtle currents slide past one another, storing disagreements that might, in a moment, lift into a small, surprising wave. A Magnetar keeps such disagreements in its skin and sky. Most of the time it is composed, its field lines disciplined as the warp and weft in a loom. Now and then, something gives. The star speaks in a language that is mostly light. We can ease into the taxonomy without hard edges. There are brief, soft bursts, little syllables, a tenth of a second, maybe less, like sparks when dry pine needles touch an ember. There are outbursts, which are longer moods, days to months, where the star glows brighter in X-rays, then slow fades to its baseline, and rarely there are giant flares, the page-turning shouts, the bell struck full, light pouring out for a fraction of a breath and echoing for minutes. The names sound large because the scales are large. We will hold them gently. At the root of these whispers lies a simple tension. The Magnetar's crust is strong, iron-like, and prefers the pattern it cooled into. The magnetic field threading that crust prefers its own low-energy shapes. Cooling, slow motion, and interior drift can twist the field lines the way winter heaves the boards of an old pier. At first the crust flexes and says, "Yes, I can accommodate." Then one day it says, "I can't." The failure is small in distance, millimeters or centimeters perhaps, but comprehensive in effect. A crack races, a patch slips, the field lines leap to a new arrangement, as if a knot were suddenly undone. In that leap, energy that had been stored invisibly as strain is set free, as light and as waves that shake the magnetosphere. Those waves have a name you might roll on your tongue like a polished stone. Alvin waves, ripples that ride along magnetic lines. The way a thought travels along a string held taut, they carry information outward, stirring the charged particles that haunt the magnetosphere like brilliant, weightless plankton. In the stirred swarm, particles collide and radiate. What was once a neat, tense lattice of field lines becomes for a moment a garden gone to seed and now rediscovering its symmetry. The briefest bursts are like hiccups of such change. A crooked patch unbends, a loop untwists. The magnetosphere flashes on, off, then remembers itself. These are common in Magnetar terms, which is to say they might occur several times in an hour during active spells, then not again for months. Instruments in orbit, tuned quick high notes, catch them as little rises on a graph, a stitch of brightness, then a return to the calm hum of the detector's background. If you blink, you miss them. But the sky does not mind our blinking. Outbursts feel different. They announce not a snap, but a season. After a small avalanche of rearrangements, the star's surface, heated by currents and internal friction, glows more intensely in X-rays. The light curve swells and holds. Days pass. The star seems to breathe more strongly, and then, as heat finds pathways to spread and the field settles, the brightness ebbs toward what we call quiescence. The word is kind. It suggests a personality that returns to itself after excitement, which might be true in its way. Giant flares. When they come, redraw the room. The opening moment arrives like a flash of lightning heard as light rather than sound. A hard spike, less than a heartbeat long, then comes a softer tail, modulated by the star's spin, as trapped fire from the initial rearrangement is released in pulses, each turn of the star showing a different face of the trapped glow. The whole event lasts minutes, which is both very long and very short, depending on whether you are an instrument or a human. For us it is a stanza in an otherwise quiet symphony. What began such a thing? Perhaps a piece of the crust too large to fail quietly, finally let slip. Perhaps the magnetosphere, wound and wound again by interior drifts. Reconnection ready, found one loop that once unfastened, encouraged all the rest. Perhaps both, like the chicken and the egg deciding to arrive together. In high fields, reconnection process by which magnetic lines reconfigure, shedding stored energy, is not the friendly fizz we watch in solar flares, but a severe conversation, sentence fragments and emphatic pauses. The result is a flood of high-energy photons and particles that would near at hand be unkind to matter. From our distance they are letters carried on the oldest postal service in the universe. Numbers exist for these things, though we step around them as one steps around gulls sleeping on a beach. A brief burst might release as much energy as our sun emits in many days, but concentrated and changed in kind. A giant flare may momentarily outshine everything in its local patch of galaxy. The mind can harden under such figures, so we let them stay misty. What helps, more than exactness, is the rhythm, sudden, then ringing, then quiet, bright, then fading, then memory. After some flares, especially the great ones, careful listening finds faint regularities in the dying light, quasi-periodic oscillations, as if a struck cathedral were ringing in overtones you could count on your fingers. One interpretation whispers that these are the star's global modes, magnetically modified vibrations of the crust and interior, the whole object acting as a single instrument. If so, the note tells us about stiffness and thickness, about field strength and geometry, the way a violin tells you about its wood when it sings. We do not need to resolve the debate here. The mere possibility that we have heard a star ring like a bell is enough to cradle us. The magnetosphere does not always sit and wait for crust to fail. It can misbehave on its own, especially if currents close to the surface and the motion of particles find a feedback. Twisted lines can kink and break in the near space without the crust's permission. Like laundry lines snapping in a wind even as the house remains still, those episodes may account for some bursts that come without obvious spin changes or long afterglows. Like fireflies that ignored the weather report and blinked anyway. Again, the story is plural. The star finds more than one way to speak. Because the bursts are quick, our technology must be watchful. Satellites keep vigil, trading messages across the world like night shift nurses. When one sees a spike, radios whisper to ground stations. Telescopes at other wavelengths are nudged awake. Astronomers pour coffee and open windows filled with numbers. Upstairs, our rooms remain warm and still, somewhere under a roof that knows your name. The only flare is the red eye of a power switch glowing softly in the dark. Between events, a magnetar gradually spends itself into gentler habits. Magnetic energy decays, heat leaks, the surface cools, starquakes grow fewer, the pulses, if present, arrive more lazily over tens of thousands of years, a length we hold in our hands. Like a ribbon, the star may pass for ordinary in the catalogues. Perhaps later still, it will resemble a cooler neutron star, its past folded as a secret into its grain. There is comfort in this aging. Fire becomes ember, ember becomes ash. Nothing is lost. Everything is rearranged. We return, before closing, to the shoreline, where we began. The pewter sea has lifted into a small, neat wave that slides ashore without sound and runs up the sand as a thin lace, then withdraws. The horizon is still there. The lighthouse beam circles. In some deep room of the night, a magnetar has sighed, and the sigh, translated into light, has begun its patient walk toward the instruments that will one day greet it. You do not need to watch the path. You only need to know that the universe carries its own news faithfully, and that most of it arrives as a whisper. Let the shoulders soften. Let the jaw release. Let the thought of sudden flares find a safe shelf in the mind, clearly labelled, far, brief, beautiful, and over. We will keep one eye half open for dates next. Not to wake us, but to place a few lanterns along the road we've been walking. Then we will dim even those and listen for the deeper dark. Calendars are usually for birthdays and harvests, for school terms and holidays, gentle scaffolds that hold our days. Tonight we lay a different kind of calendar on the table, one with only a few marked squares, each a moment when the sky sent a postcard that could not be mistaken for anything else. We will read the dates softly, not as alarms but as constellations of memory, points we can connect with a quiet line. March 5, 1979. Winter somewhere, late summer somewhere else. A day like any other, except for the briefest punctuation. Several satellites, meant for watching our own sun, startled at the same time. A spike of gamma rays, acutely bright as if someone had cracked a door and a furnace's light had slipped out, and then shut again. The source, it would be argued, was not near at all, but over the shoulder of our galaxy in a neighbouring realm, the large Magellanic Cloud. The note was brief, but it said, "There exist engines we have not yet catalogued." In offices that smelled of paper and solder, people leaned back and changed their minds about what could happen in the sky. August 27, 1998. Late summer for some, winter winds elsewhere. A giant flare announced itself, this time from within our own Milky Way, from a region of sky that already carried the quiet designation of a repeater of soft bursts. Instruments recorded an opening slash of brightness, and after a tail that rose and fell with the rhythm of a star turning. You could count the seconds in that dimming and brightening the way you might count the swing of a porch light in a storm. The modulations hinted that we were not dealing with something random, not lightning that leaves no pattern, but a body with a size, a spin, a surface, a sky. The idea of the Magnetar, once a proposal, gained a chair at the table. December 27, 2004. A date that, in many lives, already held its own weights and meanings. On that day, a flare arrived so intense that it briefly altered the high atmosphere of our planet. Not dangerously for us on the ground, but noticeably to instruments that listen to the ionized layers where radio waves travel. The initial spike was like a match struck too near the eye. The tail that followed pulsed with the turning of the source, a drumbeat counting off the seconds as if to say, "Here is my size, here is my turn, here is the way my trapped fire leaks." Across the globe, detectors held out their small hands and caught the same thing. The calendars of many labs ended the year with a new entry, written in the ink reserved for events that do not require persuasion. If those are the big lanterns, there are also smaller lights along the path, outbursts in quieter years. Little bursts that formed short-lived constellations in our catalogues, patient spin-down measurements that told of fields strong enough to slow a star. Each mark on the calendar, taken alone, might look like noise. Together they sketch a personality. The Magnetar, it seems, is a young creature by neutron star standards, most expressive in its first tens of thousands of years. Then calmer, it is prone to seasons of activity and long winters of silence. It speaks in short words, occasionally in shouts. It carries a field that tells on itself by how quickly the star's watch hand slows. A newer candle was lit when radio astronomers began to notice brief bright pips of radio light, fast radio bursts, FRBs, that arrived like pebbles flicked at the window of our attention. They seemed too quick, too bright, too far to be ordinary radio astronomy. For a while we carried them in a separate pocket, labelled mystery. Then one spring day, not so long ago, a magnetar within our own galaxy cleared its throat in high-energy bands, and at nearly the same time, a sharp radio chirp came from its direction, the alignment in time and place stitched two threads together. Not all FRBs need be magnetars, and not all magnetars need make FRBs, but some days a magnetar's rearrangement may speak in radio as well as in gamma and X-rays. The calendar, once printed in one colour, now had a little ink in another. We do not need every date, every designation. The human mind at bedtime is kindest to pattern and story. What matters is the slow, gentle recognition that our instruments, scattered around the earth and drifting above it, have begun to keep a shared diary of impossible light. When one writes an entry today, at this hour from this patch of sky, a star rang out. Another far away writes the same. The agreement is soothing. It says, what we think we are seeing is not a dream. The universe is giving a clear account of itself. We are learning to listen. On those marked days, nothing on your table would have rattled. The cat, if you have one, would have slept on. The air would have tasted the same. In the highest reaches, yes. Some molecules would have noticed a different rhythm for a minute. Yes, an instrument would have hummed as it filled a buffer, then passed the news along. But on the ground, pine trees did what they always do, distilled night into scent, and kept their counsel. Distance is a caretaker. It makes room for our sleep. If you enjoy timelines, you might string the dates like beads and notice the spaces between them. Years pass without a giant flare in our logs. This is expected. The kindling must be arranged, the stress prepared, the knot tied tight enough that when it releases, the release is worth speaking of. Smaller events too come and go in clusters. The star enters an active mood, then rests. The catalogue's entries look to a gentle eye like a pulse train, more erratic than a metronome, less erratic than a storm. Each event carries with it small gifts of inference. The shape of an afterglow suggests how energy was trapped around the star. The beat in a tail tells the spin. The radio whisper, when present, suggests that the magnetosphere's weather included a particular kind of lightning. Even the absence of certain signals is a clue. An archaeologist learns from missing pottery as well as shattered jars. In the same spirit, a night without a burst still teaches, by providing the baseline against which a burst will someday stand out. We might, if we wanted, make this calendar more local. On March 5, 1979, where were you, or where would you have been, had your story already begun? On August 27, 1998, what was the color of your bicycle? The smell in your kitchen? On December 27, 2074, what was the temperature of the air where you woke? It's a tender exercise, stitching your days to the skies, not to elevate one or diminish the other, but to let them share a page. The universe is vast, the room is small, they coexist without conflict. A magnetar can change its mind in a distant arm of the galaxy, while in your house, a kettle clicks off and the light over the sink glows like a minor star. For those who worry, who hear most dangerous star and imagine sirens, this calendar is also a ledger of reassurance. The largest flares we know have been far. Their touch here was a note recorded by machines, and for a short while, by the high air. Then the page turned. The planet kept its weather. Birds nested in spring. People fell in love, paid bills, watched the seasons flicker along the edges of their calendars. The universe's intensity is real, but its mercies, distance, dilution, direction are as real. We live under both. As we place this calendar back on the table, let us leave a few squares blank on purpose. There will be other dates. The sky is not finished. Some will belong to quiet work, measurements of polarization that reveal the glassiness of near-field space, slow timing that charts a star's aging. Some will belong to suddenness, outbursts that pull us from dinner to laptop in a flurry of polite emails, a radio chirp that arrives on a foggy morning and makes someone smile alone in a lab. We will not try to predict them. We will simply keep careful pens. The room has grown softer since we began. Perhaps you hear the faintest traffic far away, a sound like waves in miniature. Perhaps there is only the hum of the house and a window holding the dark like a cup. Somewhere, on a day that is not yet circled, a magnetar will shrug again, and a few minutes later, or a few years later depending on where it sits, the world will receive the shrug as a feather of light. It will be noticed. It will be written down. Then the pens will be put away, and the night will continue to be itself. If you are still awake, feel how the calendar of your own body marks time. The slow thread of breath, the soft countdown of muscles, letting go one after another, the drift of thought that becomes less like a sentence and more like a tide. The dangerous star is on its page. Your room is on its page. Both books are open, both are turning, and both, tonight, are kind. In the oldest libraries, there are rooms so still that the page turning in a far aisle sounds like weather. Astronomers have built such rooms in the sky, quiet listeners that sit above the air, or stand in deserts, or lie along wide valleys, each one tuned not to sentences, but to syllables of light. They listen for magnetars the way a night watchman listens for the soft click of a latch in an otherwise silent house. High above clouds, a small fleet keeps vigil. Some instruments watch the entire dome at once, waiting for the briefest flash. Others prefer attention to detail, staring at a single target and counting its heartbeats. When a magnel mutters, a tenth of a second perhaps, the all-sky listeners notice and send a note. Look here, look now. Narrow-eyed telescopes swivel, as if someone had pointed toward a spill of moonlight on the far end of the lake. What do they count? They count turns. A magnetar rotates once every few seconds, slowly, with dignity. Each turn carries a pattern of light across our line of sight. Sometimes a pulse, sometimes only a gentle rhythm in X-rays. By comparing the time between pulses tonight, next week, next season, we learn that the star is slowing. Just a whisper, but measurable. From the rate of that slowing, we infer the strength of the invisible hand on the flywheel, the magnetic field that quietly steals energy from the spin and gives it to space. We do not need equations in the dark. It is enough to know that time itself can weigh a field, and that patience becomes an instrument. They count also the small missteps. Every so often a magnetar's rhythm hops ahead, as if the pocket watch in the mind's palm ticked twice too quickly and then settled. That hop is a glitch, the faint echo of interior vortices unpinning from the crust and slipping to a calmer arrangement. The star corrects itself. The listeners make a note. In the margin of that note, in handwriting you can barely see, someone writes, "The interior may be superfluid, the crust may be strong," a guess with a smile. Between the spikes and the beats lies colour of a sort. Not colour for eyes, but a spectrum of energies, soft X-rays, hard X-rays, the uppermost gamma light. When a burst arrives, its brightness as a function of energy, the shape of its syllable tells a little story. Did the field encourage photon splitting, softening the highest edge? Did trapped fire in the magnetosphere dribble out in a way that leaves the tail warmer than the opening drum beat? We compare one event to another, like shells gathered at tide, noticing ridges, whispering perhaps this one was shaped by reconnection outside the crust. Perhaps that one began with a crack in iron. Sometimes the message is in the polarization, the alignment of the light's electric field, a silent tilt. In ordinary space, polarization is a modest trait. Near a magnetar, it might be a signature as clear as handwriting. If the vacuum behaves like a glass that favors one orientation over another, then light passing through that glass will carry the bias with it. Instruments capable of such delicate reading are like librarians, who with a fingertip can tell the thickness of a page. They turn a flare this way and that and say, "It leans." That lean becomes a measurement of the field's presence, not as myth, but as influence. On Earth, radio arrays wait in the quiet hour before dawn. When the air is cool and forgiving, and the ionosphere lifts like a veil, after a high-energy murmur, they listen for a lower, sharper chirp. Not every flare speaks in radio, and not every radio chirp belongs to a magnetar. But sometimes the threads braid. When they do, the timing milliseconds dancing with milliseconds can be stitched into a single event, a rearrangement in the star's near sky that briefly shouted across wavelengths like a lighthouse, that flashed white, then blue, then white again, all in the span of a breath. Catalogues grow from this listening. They are not sleepy at all. They're busy in a quiet way. Dates, coordinates, pulse periods, slowdowns, burst counts, notes on afterglows. The pages look like ledger books one might find in an old shop. The columns, lovingly kept. Each entry is modest alone. Together they become a biography written by many hands. A magnetar's early years are full of corrections and marginalia. With age, the handwriting steadies. The field weakens. Bursts become rare. The star joins the quieter stacks. We also listen to what is not there. Some burst should be accompanied by a particular afterglow, if our favorite story is true. When the afterglow is missing, we revise the story, just a little. Some stars should slow at such and such a rate if only a dipole field acts. When they do not, we admit the layered complexity within toroidal wraps, hiding energy, currents that drift like slow rivers under ice. This absence reading is like walking a beach and noticing where the sand is smoothest. The smooth patch tells you about the wind you did not see. The tools have their temperaments. Instruments in orbit are alert and impartial. They see what the sky does and do not blink. Telescopes on the ground are aspirational creatures. They try, but they must negotiate with weather, with the bright moon, with the small needs of people. Arrays of dishes, spread like herds across plains, combine their hearing to act as one great ear. Single dishes, shaped like white lilies dropped into fields, drink from the sky with solemnity. Each has a favorite kind of music. Magnetars, being generous in their variety, sometimes play to them all. When something happens, and the word happens might be too loud, perhaps we should say, when the star rearranges itself by a fraction. The world of listeners becomes briefly human. Emails cross time zones like muted birds. Little plots appear in shared folders. Nighttime graphs lit by laptop glow. Someone in a small apartment, with plants on the sill and a mug cooling by the trackpad, posts a figure and writes softly thrilled, "There it is." Outside their window, the city is drowsy and broad-shouldered. A magnetar, 100,000 years of travel away, has sent a syllable. The syllable is caught, named, saved, and added to the book. You don't need to hold the instruments in your head. Not the acronyms, not the mirrors, not the strings of digits. Just keep the image of a few quiet rooms that never sleep, listening without judgment. In your own room, the only instrument is your breath, and it is excellent, steady, measuring the night without numbers. If, while you rest, a star decides to speak, the listeners will answer. They are very good at their work. The universe, being grand, leaves them much to do and much to doubt. Doubt, strangely, is the softest pillow. It lets the mind lie down knowing that tomorrow will bring another page to turn. For now we have heard enough to trust the pattern. A city-sized bell, a cathedral of lines, occasional quakes, a spin that slows, a field that fades. We will carry that trust into a more mysterious hallway next, the corridor of sudden radio flashes that cross the dark like thrown pebbles. Some may be the quick lightning of magnetars, some may be other weather entirely. We'll walk there slowly, hand on the rail, listening for the same hush that fills the pines on windless nights. There is a particular kind of midnight quiet, when a distant sound, one click, clean as a bead of glass, travels farther than it should. Fast radio bursts feel like this. They are brief, bright pips in the radio sky, sometimes repeating from the same patch of space, sometimes firing once and then keeping their counsel. They arrive with dispersion, their higher notes touching Earth a moment before their lower notes. A smear the intergalactic medium paints on them as they pass. In that smear is a measure of how much thin matter lies between us and the sender. A tape measure made of delay. For a while these clicks were a little island. We circled them with our boats, took samples of the air, speculated about the soil, then a magnetar, not in some far galaxy but within our own, spoke in its native high-energy tongue, and near the same time, delivered a radio pip. The alignment of moments stitched the island to the mainland. It suggested that at least some fast radio bursts are the radio syllables of magnetar storms. A brief coherent flash, perhaps born where twisted field lines reconnect and launch a shock into the magnetosphere's paraplasma air. Not the whole story, but a thread. Follow the thread and you find rooms with different wallpaper. Some FRBs repeat, sometimes in clusters, sometimes with seasons of activity and seasons of sleep. That moodiness feels magnetar-like. The same neighborhood of sky bright one week, silent the next, as if interior drifts and crustal stresses were writing and erasing invitations. Other FRBs seem content with a single note, one click and gone, mirroring the possibility that some rearrangements are rare, or that the engine that made them lost its vigor soon after. Perhaps there are multiple engines. Perhaps there is a family resemblance among many, but not all. When a fast burst repeats, radio rays can draw a tighter circle on the sky and ask for an address. The host galaxies vary. Some young and busy with star formation, where massive stars live fast and die nearby, birthing neutron stars in clusters, some older, quieter streets, occasionally the heart of a galaxy, crowded and complex. Magnetars are more likely to be young, and young things are more likely to dwell in star-forming neighborhoods. The correspondence is not perfect, but the map has the right feel, like footprints that are the right size even if the stride is surprising. What, physically, is the click? One picture, softly held, begins with a crustal slip or a twist unraveled near the star, which drives a disturbance outward. That disturbance steepens like a shallow water wave approaching shore, compressing particles until they radiate together, in phase, a chorus rather than a crowd. Coherent emission is a special thing. It lets many small voices add up to a shout. For a millisecond or two, the magnetosphere becomes a radio instrument playing one clear note. The note crosses space, passes through the faint fog of electrons between galaxies, and arrives here slightly stretched, its higher tones first, its lower tones last. In that stretch we read distance and density. In the brightness we read violence turned elegant. There are alternative tales. Some point to magnetar winds, colliding with earlier shells of ejected material, the shock lighting up like static when a sweater is pulled. Others look near the star to instabilities that flare without crustal help, kinks and kites in the field lines, reconfigurations that snap like tightened wire. There are even models that invite different actors entirely to the stage for some events. The coexistence of stories is not a problem at bedtime, it is comfort. The universe may prefer a repertoire. The human part of this story is joyful logistics. To trap a burst that lasts 1,000th of a second, you must ask your instruments to be ready all the time, and you ask your people to live with their shoes by the door. When a burst is caught, alarms, polite ones, ripple through mailboxes. Observatories at other wavelengths are nudged. Can you look now? Sometimes X-ray eyes see a companion flare from the they's direction, arms folded across the chest, saying, yes, that was me. Sometimes they see nothing, and we learn that radio can be the only language spoken that day. The dispersion measure that Smear the Cosmos adds has become a soft ruler for the thin space between galaxies. Each FRB is a pinprick that lights up a line of that fog. Add enough pinpricks, and you begin to trace the unseen. In this way, magnetars, if they are responsible for a healthy fraction of the bursts, double as cartographers. They are dangerous to matter nearby, but at our distance they are benevolent, lighthouses sketching with each sweep the shape of the coast. A few FRBs show a preference for particular rhythms, bursts that come at intervals or seasons when the activity swells on a cycle, measured in months. If a magnetar is in a binary system, orbiting a companion, there might be a natural calendar to its outbursts, weather changing as it moves through denser winds, or swings closer to a field that tugs, or the rhythm could be internal, the star's own magnetic weather having tides we have not yet named. The mind loves a pattern. The sky gives us just enough to keep us generous with hypotheses. Because the bursts are so brief, they invite tender metaphors. You could think of them as pebbles tossed at a window in a romantic comedy you half remember, or as the faint, bright click of a porcelain cup set gently on a saucer 2 rooms away, or as the electrical crackle when you pull a wool sweater over your head in a dry winter, an invisible flash you sometimes hear. None are exact. They are enough to calm the mind's appetite for precision and leave room for sleep. If you are still awake, let your attention widen and soften like a radio array spread across a plain. Dishes turn not to one star but to the whole sky. Somewhere a magnetar has just finished a small rearrangement. Somewhere else, a different engine has done the same. A millisecond-long note has been launched, bright, coherent, intent, and is now traveling through the enormous quiet. It will pass the arms of galaxies that never learned our names, thread the thin gas between clusters, drift by dust that once was the breath of a red giant, and approach, much later, an instrument on a hill where the night smells of sagebrush and cool stone. There it will be caught, digitized and made into a line on a screen. Someone will lean closer and smile. Perhaps tomorrow or next year, a similar note will be accompanied by a soft flare in higher energies from the same address, closing the loop. Perhaps it will not. Either way, The thread remains a thread, not a chain to bind thought, but a ribbon to tie one idea to another. Magnetars, it seems, can make radio lightning. They are not required to, but they are able. That ability, held lightly, is enough to guide us into the next room of our nighttime museum. The house around you has grown quiet, in a way that carries kindness. Pipes have cooled. The refrigerator breathes softly. The streetlight hums as if speaking to itself. Beyond the roof, the sky continues its low work. The lighthouse beam slides, unhurried, across the bay and over the sleeping pines. The pocket watch keeps time slower, perhaps, than when we began. In our next steps, we will walk back inside the star for a closer listen to quakes and chimes, the ringing modes that may follow a snap, and then we will step out again into weather, magnetic and otherwise. For now, close the museum doors in your mind. The FRB wing will be there when you return. There is a certain hush in winter woods, when the lake skin hardens, and without warning, a line of sound walks the ice from shore to shore. It begins as pressure, invisible and patient. It ends as a clean report that echoes lightly through the pines. A Magnetar's crust keeps such winter in its bones. It is a lattice, iron-hard, tidy as frost, stretched over a heart that turns and a field that insists. Most days the lattice holds. Some days it remembers that even strong things must yield. We have been using gentle metaphors, bells and cathedrals, to keep the mind soft near difficult truths. Tonight we step a little closer, still soft. Think of the crust, as pages bound into a book by forces that dislike disorder. As the interior cools and currents drift, the magnetic field threads those pages with a quiet twist. The book wishes to lie flat, the thread wishes to pull. The compromise grows thin, a seam gives. The page slips by the width of a fingernail. On Earth, a slip of that size would be unremarkable. In a magnetar, it is theatre. A crack races in a fraction of a second, too quickly for the mind to count, and magnetic loops, once held in an awkward pose, jump to an easier stance. The jump pays out energy long stored as tension. That payment arrives as high-energy light and as waves that ripple along the field, like news carried through string. The star in that instant has... The signature of the snap is not always one thing. Sometimes the star's rotation, counted heartbeat by heartbeat in X-rays, hops ahead by a whisper, what we call a glitch, as if the hands of an old clock briefly remembered their youth. One picture for this hop is the sudden unpinning of superfluid vortices beneath the crust, those tiny whirlpools stuck for a time to the lattice above, release together and slide inward, spinning the rest of the star a touch faster. The move is small, the meaning large. It hints at a heart that flows without friction, at a crust that can hook and hold even the strange. There are rarer cousins, anti-glitches, steps the other way as if stress briefly slowed the turn. Their presence reminds us that the interior is not a single instrument, but an ensemble. The superfluid, the lattice, the field, each keeps its own time. When a star snaps, the ensemble negotiates. Sometimes the outcome is a brisk half-step forward, sometimes a held note. After the first bright syllable of a quake, the tension turns to the ring down, the way a room sounds after a door has slammed, and we are left with tremors. In a handful of great flares, the dying light carries a structure, quasi-periodic oscillations that feel like a set of chimes hung inside the star. The exact notes and their spacing could be clues to the crust's thickness, to how firmly the interior is coupled, to how the field threads everything together. It is a gentle practice, this astrosymology, using echoes to sketch what hands will never touch. The sketches may be revised. That they are possible at all is a quiet astonishment. Not every fracture announces itself with light we can catch. Some failures bleed energy into heat, raising the surface by a margin our detectors gather as a slow brightening instead of a shout. Picture a hidden splinter in wood that warms under your palm before it shows. In those seasons, the star's spectrum softens, then settles. The crust story is written in two inks, one for suddenness, one for drift. We ask as we must, what begins the beginning? Does a twist in the near-surface field ratchet the stress upward, until the lattice yields. Does a motion in the deep, where nuclear pasta may layer like sheets and rods, transmit a shove that the crust cannot fully absorb? The answers arrive as probabilities, not verdicts. Some events look instinctively crust-led, a glitch wrapped in a burst. Others smell of the magnetosphere acting on its own, a flash with no change in spin, like wires in a storm coming loose while the house holds fast. Part of the lullaby is this: the universe allows more than one pathway to the same sound. We linger for a moment on the feel of the crack itself. In the mind's ear it is a sharp note. In the star it might be very quiet, a line of altered bonds racing through a lattice too dense to think of breaking in the human sense. The field notices before our instruments do. Lines that were bent too tightly spring wider, loops that were tangled find a freer shape. In that rearrangement, particles trapped on those lines are shoved, and shoved particles radiate. The outburst is an afterthought, a graceful one of a structural relief. Sometimes the relief is local, a single knuckle in a single joint, easing at last. Sometimes it runs broad, like a shoulder rolling back. After the quake, the star may enter a season of small corrections, aftershocks for a star, tiny bursts over days or weeks as the magnetosphere retunes its strings and heat works its way outward. We see the pattern often enough to trust it. A main event, a chorus of smaller ones, a long exhale. Between quakes, the crust continues its unseen labor. Cooling shifts its composition. A crowded alphabet, march towards simpler words. Impurities migrate. The lattice capacity to hold stress may change with age. A young magnetar can be brash, an older one dignified, or perhaps the opposite. We do not fix the story too tightly. We keep a small light on the desk and allow for revisions, even in sleep. The mind likes to know there is a place to set a new page. In the quiet after a snap, some dream of gravitational murmurs, ripples in the fabric of space-time made not by the whole star dancing, but by tiny misalignments in the mass as the crust shifts. If they exist, they are faint and far below our hearing tonight, more rumor than sound. But the rumor comforts. It suggests a completeness to the star's voice, light for the eyes we do not have, radio for ears we build, waves in space-time for instruments still learning their first words. You can let the technicalities fall away now, like crumbs brushed from a quilt. Keep only the shape. Pressure gathers, a seam gives, light is made, the star rings. It settles, it ages, it grows quieter. This is not a cycle of menace. It is a cycle of restoration. Even the most dangerous star, when it snaps, is trying to return to ease. As you lie there, feel how the body does similar work on smaller scales. A stiff shoulder softens by degrees. A thought that had been held too tightly loosens, and in loosening releases a little heat. The jaw remembers it does not have to hold. The mind notes a click somewhere on its frozen lake, and then decides kindly to let the sound pass into distance. The room accepts. The night, made of patient hours, remains. We will step outward next, into weather, the way the space around a magnetar behaves when the field is twisted, and the air is made of pairs of light-borne particles. We'll take the umbrella of metaphor with us. The forecast, even when it calls for storms, ends in clearing. In quiet spells, the dome is serene. A gentle glow in X-rays leaks from heat conducted outward, soft and steady as dawn through curtains. Now and then, a slow drift in the crust below nudges the lines, building twist in a particular bundle that hangs like a rope bridge from one magnetic footpoint to another. That bundle carries current the way a thundercloud carries charge. It is a reservoir of stored weather. When the load is too great, the bridge shortens itself. Magnetic reconnection, one of nature's neatest tricks, splices lines into a new arrangement, shedding the extra energy as particles sped and light released. The storm in that pruning ends itself. Look up from the crust, and you find an invisible architecture, a vault of magnetic lines, arching and dipping, some open to space, some closing back upon the star like well-tied loops. Along these lines, the pair plasma streams as if on rails. Where the lines converge, particles reflect. Where they shear, They mingle and radiate. The whole is a dome filled not with wind but with tension in that dome is stored as twist. The lines not in their lowest energy arrangement, but braided, as if fingers had turned a length of rope upon itself and now held it, humming, under strain. It's a comfort to hear the forecast when the day has no demands. Sun followed by clouds, chance of rain toward evening, a breeze from the west that flirts with the pines, and then moves on. A magnetar is weather too, though its air is not our air, and its storms are not stitched from water. The atmosphere above its crust is a skin of particles conjured by energy itself, electrons and positrons born in pairs, vanishing if left alone, sustained by the field's insistence when it is twisted and tense. During an active hour, the magnetosphere can feel crowded. Photons scatter off the swarming pairs, losing and gaining energy in a careful dance. Resonant cyclotrons scattering, if we give it a name, as if light and particle were partners in a waltz, taught by the field. Harder light may be made this way, not from cruelty but from choreography. The result is a spectrum with a shoulder, a line with a tilt, the kind of detail that makes observers hum softly as they fit models to the curve. The joy, whispered so as not to wake you, is that a storm's light carries the fingerprints of the weather that made it. In the minutes after a burst, the weather clears like a squall, moving offshore. The twisted bundle, sometimes called a J-bundle by those who enjoy such nicknames, untwists, its current fading. The pair density thins, the light softens. If the outburst was large, a faint afterglow may remain, fed by particles trapped near the star that slowly leak their energy as they mirror and drift. In timing this fade, you can feel the map how far the trapping region extends, how strong the field holds, how quickly the dome forgets its storm. We borrow comfort from our home planet here. Earth's magnetic field, modest and sheltering, plays its own weather games. Solar wind tugs at our magnetotail, lines reconnect, energy is dumped into the polar sky, and auroras pour down as curtains of green and red silk. The ring current strengthens, then weakens. Substorms come like brief tempests, splitting and curling the lights above northern lakes. A magnotar is this, retuned for a different orchestra, higher energies, fiercer lines, an air made of light's own children. The family resemblance matters more than the differences. Both prefer balance, both discharge their tensions in swift, structured ways, both go still after. There is a delicate proverb in plasma: what the field lines do, the world near them obeys. If the lines inflate because of pressure from below, the near sky expands. If they shrink back, the near sky sighs. This breathing might not be visible as shape, but it is visible as mood in the spectral colors, in the polarization that tilts this way and then that, in the very presence or absence of radio clicks that require just the right conditions to sing. A forecast for magnetar weather reads like this: partly twisted with a chance of reconnection, brief showers of high-energy light, periods of quiescent X-ray afterglow, gradual clearing to baseline. Once in a while, when the twist is both strong and compact, the weather performs a more dramatic act. An impulsive reconnection opens a path along which a shock races, sweeping up pairs and driving them into a coherent shout. The kind of condition that can hatch a fast radio burst. The analogy would be lightning, if lightning were born in a cathedral made of lines, instead of a cloud. The shout is brief, the clearing is quick. Long after, the atmosphere remembers only in how easily it can be twisted again, as if the ropes have learned the lesson of their own knots. We are cautious not to claim that every storm is born the same way. Some are top-down, magnosphere first, with the crust merely adjusting to the new posture. Some are bottom-up, crust first, with the dome catching the shock like a sail catching a gust. The symmetry itself is calming. There are two doors to the same room, and nature uses both, choosing whichever is open that day. In this weather, light can become almost tactile. Polarization, that subtle tilt, turns into a windsock, telling where the lines lean. Spectral hardening and softening correspond to stiff gusts and gentle breezes in the particle sea. Pulse profiles, the brightness folded over a rotation, warp, and then straighten, like clouds stretched by high air and then gathering back into their usual streets. Forecasters of such skies keep diaries and compare entries across years. They learn that every magnetar has its habits. One favors sudden squalls, another prefers long, slow rains. We speak of danger because it is honest. Up close, these storms would erase chemistry, ask matter to behave in ways that would undo the prologue of life. But we are not up close. We live under another dome, on a world whose own magnetic weather is scaled for comfort, where storms pass, trees flex, and the air smells of charged rain and cooled stone. From here, a Magnetar's tempest is a postcard, a photograph of lightning over a far ridge, mailed first class by photons and arriving with its ink still wet. We look, we admire, we put it on the refrigerator, and then we make tea. Hold for a moment an image gentle enough to carry into sleep. You are on a porch after summer rain. The horizon is clean. Somewhere beyond it, a storm has spent itself, leaving only a distant murmur above a magnetar's crust. The plasma air has thinned. The twisted ropes have relaxed. The cathedral has gone clear as glass. The star turns. Its pulse is a metronome again, not perfect, but calm and calmer with each passing season. The forecast for the rest of the night is kind. Fewer bursts. Low, steady light. A chance of small corrections before morning. In your own room, a quieter forecast still. Cooler sheets. Muscles learning the grammar of letting go. The pocket watch in the mind ticking as if between one breath and the next, there were a little more space than before. Soon we will bring this weather home, asking what it would take for a storm from such a star to matter here, and why even the largest tempests we know have left our nights mostly unchanged. For now, feel the clearing. The lighthouse beam has completed another round, the bay as smooth as a held breath. The pine needles keep their scent and their counsel, and the most dangerous star so far away has decided to rest. There is a kindness in distance that we learn early, often without knowing. Lightning can split a tree on the far ridge, and from a porch 2 valleys away, the sound arrives as a soft roll, the flash as a brief whitening of the clouds. Danger and beauty, both present, are sifted by the miles into something we can watch. Magnetars live within this kindness. Their storms are real. Their reach, for us, is almost always a whisper. We can picture it gently. Light spreads the way ripples spread from a pebble tossed into a pond. Wider and wider, the same energy painted over a larger circle. By the time a ripple reaches the shaded bank, it is only a lift of the water's skin, so it is with a flare. What would be severe at a hand's breadth becomes mild at a galaxy's arm length. The Ender square law is a hard phrase for a soft truth. Distance relaxes intensity. Our world is not bare to the sky. Even when the night looks as thin as silk, the earth wears layered shawls. There is air, yes, nesting from dense to wispy, and there is the planet's magnetic field, modest in scale, cozy in effect, guiding charged particles toward the poles, encouraging auroras that look like thought made visible. High above, the ionosphere listens with exquisite sensitivity. It notices things the kitchen table never will. On a December day years ago, a magnetar's roar from far away briefly ruffled that high layer. Radios felt it. Instruments wrote it down. Down here, the cat slept on. Most dangerous is an honest phrase for a star that can unbraid matter where it stands. But danger has conditions. To trouble our days in an immediate way, a giant flare would have to arrive from very near, and all the directions would have to line up just so beam toward us. Atmosphere receptive, timing unkind. The sky could make such alignments. It is allowed, and yet it mostly does not. Magnetars, by their naissance, among massive stars, tend to live where those stars were born, regions we know from their bright young company, and those neighborhoods are for us far across the map. Nearby, the catalogue is thin. The ones we watch with care are thousands, even tens of thousands of light years away. Their postcards take generations to travel. Their ink fades politely unroot. If one asks what near would mean in a way that drifts you toward wakefulness, we decline the exactness and keep the feeling very near. A handful of light years, a few dozen domestic distances, on the galactic map, and aimed just so. Models suggest that only then would chemistry in our upper air be coaxed into a different mood for more than a moment. Only then would we have a sky worth worrying over. This is not our situation. Our sky has its habits. The seasons come. The ozone continues its quiet work. Winter has a smell. Summer has a sound. It helps to remember that the universe often writes its strongest sentences in specific directions. Jets and beams are like flashlights held by children, sometimes pointed at us, often pointed elsewhere. A magnetar's flare need not be perfectly symmetrical. It may favor a slice of space as it releases its tension. If we are not in that slice, we receive only the light that's spilled into all directions, watered by distance until it feels like a memory more than a mandate. Our instruments, being patient, are built to notice such memories. Our lives, being lived on the ground, are mostly untouched. There are cousins to magnetar flares that sometimes arrive from much farther, much brighter, the long and short gamma ray bursts tied to titanic collapses and mergers. Those are their own stories, written on different days in the cosmic almanac. We mention them here only to lower the shoulders, even among the brightest of those, the kind that would trouble us from afar, would need to be aimed as if by intent, and our catalogues of nearby likely engines are quiet. It is a large sky with many empty squares. Silence, in astronomy, is often a form of safety, and so we can set the kettle without looking up. We can walk under pines that distill the dark into a scent like green tea and iron. We can restore meaning to the word danger by remembering that it contains both power and proximity. The magnetar is powerful. It is not proximate. The lighthouse beam on the far point swings past and brightens the water by the rocks. At our dock, it is a paler gold on the pilings, beautiful and harmless. If we must carry a rule into daylight, let it be this: scale and distance take their turns, caring for us. The same world that allows city-sized stars to hold fields like cathedrals also allows those cathedrals to stand unimaginably far away. The same equations that describe a dangerous burst also describe its dilution, its softening, its becoming a note so slight that only the instruments hear it. We can be curious without being vigilant. We can grant our sleep to the miles between. This does not empty the sky of meaning. If anything, it grows the meaning. From our safe porch, we can become better listeners. We can greet the rare flares as news, not alarm. We can read what they whisper about matter and field, about how stars cool, about how galaxies seed their arms with the ash of old brightness. We can let the word danger be an honest adjective about nature's range, not a forecast about our night. Imagine your favorite window, the way the glass holds the cool and shows a scrim of your room, floating over the dark outside. Behind that ghostly reflection, beyond even the clouds, if there are any, space continues, quiet, patient, restless on its own scales. Somewhere a magnetar will speak again. The syllable will cross the years, step down through the shoals of air, glance off the invisible rails of our planet's field, and be written down by a satellite whose panels sip sun as if it were morning. You will pour tea, you will blow on the steam. The most dangerous star will have done what it does, and your breath will be the only weather in your room. In a moment, we will turn from the forecast to the calendar of a single star's life. How long a magnetar keeps its storms. How it softens what it becomes when the field that once felt eternal decides to rest. The pocket watch in our palm ticks more slowly than at the beginning of the night. The lighthouse beam has gone around and returned, a faithful metronome. The pines do not move, they only breathe. Let's step through time now, not forward as we usually do, but downward, into the grain where years and centuries are just different flavors of quiet. There are trees that live for thousands of years, and yet grow so slowly you could miss a century in the thickness of your thumbnail. A magnetar's life, by stellar standards, is like the brief bright ring a finger leaves on a tabletop after lifting a hot mug. Intense at first, cooling quickly, and then a mark fading, but present that teaches something about what came before. It is short and it is enough. Begin with birth, which we have visited. The newborn magnetar is hot from collapse, restless with field, spinning in seconds like a clock, willing itself to be a drum. It glows in X-rays from a surface still adjusting. It is prone to small outbursts as the crust and the magnetosphere negotiate their truce. This youth is measured in thousands of years, perhaps tens of thousands blink lengths in a galaxy's dawn to dusk. During this time, the star's magnetic field is the main author of its behavior, stealing spin to light the space around, cracking the crust when the twist is too large for comfort, insisting on a radiance that is not merely heat, but structure. Spin slows. The watch hand falls back by tiny fractions of a second. Field decays, not uniformly, as if a conductor were gradually muffling sections of an orchestra, but according to pathways that depend on impurities in the crust, on the subtleties of how currents can drift in such dense matter. The grand term ohmic decay hides a tender image, stress finding easier routes, memory diffusing, the grip relaxing. In the first 10,000 years, the change may be a steep hillside. Later it becomes a long slope. Outbursts grow rare, then rarer, quiescent light softens. The star does not vanish when the stage darkens. It remains a neutron star, quieting into the company of its kin. Some ex-magnetars may wear the badge of high-field pulsars for a while, still magnetized above the ordinary, but more metronome than tempest. Some might pass through a phase of soft X-ray emitters, warm stones along a path whose heat comes from deeper than a crust can show. Others may be indistinguishable from the many neutron stars that dot catalogues with modest entries: position, period, a note about a faint companion, or a probable birthplace in a remnant like a petaled cloud. This too is part of the lullaby. The frightening is also fleeting. The most dangerous star is a phase in a longer life that becomes, with time, less about eruption and more about endurance. The field that could unmake atoms loosens its doctrine. The crust, once cracked often, finds decades and centuries of uninterrupted calm. Inside, the superfluid heart continues to keep its own counsel, its vortices slowly rearranging as the spin decreases. Deepest of all, matter behaves as it has no chance to behave anywhere else, and this continues no matter what the magnetosphere chooses to do. Aging carries echoes forward. The supernova that made the magnetar spread heavy elements into the neighborhood, seeds for future planets and bodies enough like ours to wonder. The remnant, a shell, a filamented wreath, expands for tens of thousands of years, then thins into the general medium, a trace that becomes a texture. If the magnetar was born from a more dramatic event, like a merger, there may have been a different kind of echo, a brief bright blue of our process elements, a spray of gold and platinum in proportions the universe does not make easily otherwise. Either way, the neighborhood is changed for the better, chemically richer, structurally stirred. On human scales, a magnetar's arc resembles a life you might recognize. Early years are volatile, middle years are competent and patterned, later years are quieter, heat radiated from within rather than gathered from without. There may be late surprises, a final outburst after a long calm, like a laugh you thought had left the room. Mostly, though, the trend is toward gentleness. Even the word decay, which in some context feels like loss, here reads more like relief. What is heavy is set down. What is taut is unstrung. What must hold for a time is allowed to rest. If we pan the camera back to the galaxy, magnetars become freckles scattered along spiral arms, brightest where stars are born in companies. They are rare, but not vanishingly so, enough to be part of the galactic conversation without dominating it. Over millions of years, new ones appear as old ones retire into quieter names. The arm that holds our sun is a slow conveyor. Material passes from cloud to cloud again, and magnetars are one of the ways the cycle learns about extremes. The long echo is not only light, it is permission. Because such extremes exist, gentler things have a frame in which to be meaningful. There is a softer echo still. Ideas migrate across generations. A kind of cultural radiation. The first scientists who suspected magnetars left papers like cairns along a high trail. Others followed, adding stones, correcting the stack when it leaned. Instruments were proposed, built, flown. Young researchers wrote their first lines in the log. Observed burst, rise time 0.1s, tail modulated, and years later taught students to notice that certain oscillations, faint and fussy, might hide something subtle. This human echo carries forward the same lesson as the stellar one. Intensity can mature into steadiness. Flashes can become understanding. The immediate concede the enduring. If in the small hours, doubts wander in, could we be surprised? Could there be a magnetar hidden closer than we think? The calendar we made earlier answers. The nearby sky is well listened to. Catalogues of our neighborhood's young clusters are patient and thorough. The distances stack like cushions. None of this is a guarantee. Nature refuses those, but it is a very good blanket. Warm, well made, and tucked under at the sides. As for the end of a Magnetar's story, there is no end in the theatrical sense. No curtain crash, no sudden silence. The watch hand slows until its movement is a rumor. The field becomes a habit rather than a command. The star itself persists, as neutron stars persist, holding back gravity with a quantum firmness that is almost shy. Perhaps in unimaginable stretches another process will take over. Perhaps the universe will cool into moods where even neutron stars have to confess to time. That is not tonight's concern. Tonight is for the middle, the part where life has storms and then the storms pass. Close your eyes for a few breaths, and picture the lighthouse again. In its early years, the lens was freshly polished, the keeper young, the oil bright, the beams swept with zeal, brighter than needed. A little proud. Decades later, the glass is still clear, but the brass shows the fingerprints of careful hands. The beam is steady, not striving, exactly enough for the work. In the very late years, the light is an heirloom. It still turns, it still protects. It says, "Here I am," less to announce and more to reassure. A magnetar follows such a path. So perhaps, do we. The long echo sounds even as we sleep. In someone's server room, quietly cooled air moves around racks that hum. A dataset grows by a small line each night as instruments mail home their numbers. In someone's notebook, a graph has been boxed with a pencil, a neat rectangle of interest. Over a quiet ocean, a satellite points its detectors into a patch of dark that, by all accounts, will be quiet tonight. This is the galaxy at peace with its brightest temperaments. This is the universe making space for rest. When we wake later, when the kettle begins its low talk, and the window is a grey square that will shortly admit dawn, the magnetars will still exist. Some will be infants, some middle-aged, some old and dignified. A few will be preparing a small surprise for some future night. Most will be doing what almost everything in the universe does most of the time: holding, cooling, turning. The echo of their brief fierceness will be folded into the metals in a ring, the elements in a seed, the clarity of a thought someone has in a quiet bus. The pocket watch ticks. Not loudly, not with urgency, just a gentle measure of a night in which dangerous things have learned to be gentle. The lighthouse beam slides. The pines keep their counsel and their scent, and the air by your bed is a good temperature to rest in. We will walk on soon to the map, the wear of magnetars, and then to the close. For now, let the notion of a brief life and a long echo find a shelf behind your eyes. The book can stay open there, a ribbon marking our place, while you drift. Every journey ends by opening a map. Not the kind folded into a glove compartment with crisp borders and towns in tidy ink, but a night map, a map of habit and rumor, of places made of light and patience. Spread this one across the table of your imagination. It smells faintly of pine resin and old paper. In its corners, the Milky Way's spiral arms coil like long rivers seen from a sleeping plane. Where do magnetars live? We draw with a soft pencil first, so we can erase. They prefer neighborhoods where massive stars are born and burn out quickly. Places where the gas is still blue with youth. Spiral arms are good addresses. There, gravity has gathered enough material to light new suns in clusters, and among those suns are the ones that will end in core collapse, leaving behind city-sized remnants. The magnetars we know often keep close to such nurseries, as if still listening for the voices that first warmed their faces. Hold the galaxy at arm's length, and you'll see a band of mottled brightness, the galactic plane, stretching from horizon to horizon. Most magnetars, when plotted, cling to this band like swallows to a roofline. They rarely wander far above or below. Time has not granted them the years needed to drift. If the Milky Way were a string of lanterns along a river road, magnetars would be the paper lanterns still held close to where they were first lit. Some sit inside the faint petals of supernova remnants, wreaths of glowing gas blown outward by the last breath of the star that made them. In those cases, the association feels almost tender, child and cradle kept near. Others park in crowded, dusty districts where light is filtered to amber. There we read them in soft X-rays rather than invisible shimmer, tracing their positions the way you might identify a lighthouse by the rhythm of its sweep, rather than by its tower's color in daylight. Look beyond our house. There are magnetar candidates in other galaxies. Neighboring spirals with familiar armwork, dwarf galaxies where star formation flares up like brush fire, and distant patches where a fast radio burst has pointed a finger and said, "Here for this one moment." The weather was right. These far magnets are harder to place with pins and thread. Their addresses come on postcards without street names, but the stamps, the host galaxy types, still suggest young districts and busy nurseries. Wherever massive stars take their brief, bright turn, magnetars may follow as a sort of punctuation. If we bring the map close again, to the scale of rooms and roads, we notice absence as much as presence. Our immediate neighborhood, the few hundred light years where we keep our everyday stories, holds no known magnetars. This is expected. Nearby associations of young, massive stars are modest. The loudest gardens of star birth lie farther along the spiral avenues. The quiet around us, on this particular block of the galaxy, is an address chosen by chemistry and chance. We can be grateful without pride. There is an elegance to how astronomers annotate this map. Some magnetars were first marked as soft gamma repeaters, patient culprits behind clusters of brief high-energy bursts. Others became catalogue lines under the gentler title of anomalous X-ray pulsars. Anomalous because they pulsed as neutron stars do, yet their power seemed to come not from rotation alone, but from something more magnetic. Over years, as we learnt the family resemblance, the labels began to sit together at the same table. The map grew fewer colors, more coherence. Distances on such a map are not only geometry but time. A magnetar in the far side of the galaxy might have spoken when our ancestors learned to smooth stones into tools, and its syllable is only now crossing our threshold. A closer one might be sending light that will touch instruments after we are gone. The pins and threads, if we use them, have to be made of patience, not string. This turns cartography into a soft, continuous prayer. May we leave our notes clear enough for the next hands to continue the tracing. There is, too, the subtle topography of spiral arms themselves, their pattern speed, the way gas piles up and then relaxes, star formation following like wildflowers after rain. Magnetars, being the children of big stars, join this rhythm. They are the seen punctuation in an unseen sentence. If you sketched a spiral arm's recent history, you might draw a dark lane of dust, then bright young clusters, then the faded ghosts of supernova shells, and within those shells here and there, a pin that says a magnetar likely lived here. Perhaps still does, quieter now. The galactic center, thick with stars and stitched with complex fields, hosts its own riddles. A few magnetar voices have been heard from that crowded district, their pulses threading a path through turbulence to reach us. Their presence is a reminder that even in the noisiest neighborhoods, a singular metronome can be found if you know how to listen. The center is not our street, but it belongs to our city. We can bring in other galaxies now, but gently, like turning pages in a book, whose binding has grown tender in the large and small Magellanic clouds. Their names already lullabies. Supernovae leave shells we can see with backyard instruments, and inside some of those shells sit neutron stars that fit magnetar behaviors. Farther still, where galaxies are only bright brushstrokes, fast radio bursts and rare high-energy flashes point to engines we cannot resolve. The map becomes impressionistic, and yet it is still a map. Magnets living where youth and mass are common currency. Population is a soft number, held with open fingers. Magnetars are thought to be rare among neutron stars, a few in 100 perhaps, or a whisper more. A proportion that feels right, given that their making requires a choreography not every birth can manage. But rarity is not absence. Over the life of a galaxy, the sum becomes a choir, many thousands across time, each singing fiercely for a while, then folding into quieter names, leaving behind enriched neighborhoods and stories for instruments to tell. The complement to mapping is wandering. Astronomers wander by slewing dishes and mirrors along the plain, by letting their detectors sit and wait where the sky seems generous, by returning to old addresses in case the lights have come back on. We wander with them in imagination. The wanderers discover not only stars but also their own patience, their own affinity for careful habit. To map a dangerous thing and find it living mostly far from where you sleep is a strangely domestic joy. Before we fold the map, a small cartography of comfort. Draw a circle around the sun with a radius modest by galactic standards, say a few thousand light years, large enough to feel the scale, small enough to be a neighborhood. Inside that circle, mark the catalogued magnetars, their distances and moods. Notice the gaps explained by dust that hides, by instruments not always looking, by the sheer size of the canvas. Notice too the pins already set, each one a place with a story, each one the center of a ring of photons, departing in all directions like migrating birds. The birds that were pointed our way are already here, or nearly, the rest fly elsewhere, unnoticed by us, noticed by others, which is a comfort in its own right. A universe where all news is for us would be a smaller, lonelier place. Fold the map along the faint lines the cosmos has drawn. The creases land on familiar images, a lighthouse beam turning, a stand of pines distilling starlight into scent, a pocket watch calm in the palm of a hand that no longer counts. Slide the folded map back into its sleeve. We know where the dangerous stars live, close to their birthplaces, far from our porch. We know where to look when we wish to listen, and we know how to set the map aside when it is time to sleep. In the final chapter, we will close the circle, letting the most dangerous star become a lullaby. We will tether the first images to the last, turn out the last small lamp, and leave the door to the universe cracked, only enough to feel a friendly draft. The room is dim in the way rooms ask to be at the end of a long day. The window holds a slice of sky, more suggestion than seen. Somewhere farther than thought can fully carry. A magnetar completes another turn. It does not know your name. It does not need to. The sweep of its unseen beam crosses paths with dust motes, with wandering particles, with the long patience of space. The news of its existence takes the slow road, and you, on your own road, draw the covers up until they hold at the collarbone. We have walked among cathedrals of lines and skins of iron-hard lattice. We have watched a city-sized star ring like a bell, and then quiet. We have traced postcards on a calendar and stuck pins into a map that was mostly the color of distance. Now we let all of that become texture, a background hum, the way the sea becomes a single breath when you stop listening for each wave. If you turn your head just so, you can remember the first image from tonight, when the outside world leaned in with cool generosity and the pines kept the scent of their needles like an old hymn. The dangerous star, which could unbraid atoms in its fist, sat safely in the far pocket of the sky. We have never left that arrangement. The pocket remains, the star remains, the distance remains. Knowledge has brought us close in mind only, like a traveller who reads a guidebook so carefully they can smell the harbour without boarding the boat. It helps in these last minutes to give the star gentler names, not magnetar, not soft gamma repeater, not anomalous anything. Call it a stubborn ember, call it a turning hush, call it a lighthouse for ships that never sail. The mind is fond of the right words, but the body likes the right feel, and these are words that lie down easily beside sleep. Let memory dim kindly, like a lantern with oil enough to last the night, but a wick lowered until it is all halo and no glare. We keep a few pearls on a thread. Pressure gathers, a seam gives, light is made, not to rehearse danger, but to honor the way nature returns itself to balance. Even the giant chooses ease in the end. Even the fiercest field decays into an old promise kept, that most of the universe's time is spent in quiet. If a thought of risk wanders in, we tuck it under the same blanket as before. The distances are more than generous. The shawls Earth wears are warm. A flare that once ruffled the ionosphere did so like a sudden breeze at the high windows in a house whose rooms stayed still. The cat slept on then. The cat would sleep on now. We are permitted the same innocence. Bring the pocket watch close one last time. Its ticking has slowed in your awareness, not because it has changed, but because you have. At the beginning, each second might have landed like a footstep in a stairwell. Now the steps are softer, the stairwell carpeted, the landings closer together. You could count if you wished, but you don't. The watch keeps your place while you set the book down. If you are still with me, the lighthouse is back on the far point, sweeping its beam across water that remembers storms and nonetheless rests. The beam is not for you, it never was. It is for the rocks, the birds, for the idea of a coastline being cared for. But like all good care, it comforts even those who do not need it tonight. So it is with the listening rooms in orbit and on the ground, quiet librarians of the sky, turning pages for us while we sleep. We can permit ourselves one last borrowing from the star's interior, the superfluid heart, moving without friction. At this hour, perhaps your own thoughts can adopt a similar grace, slipping past corners that would snag them at noon, flowing around questions that would demand answers at 3 p.m., circling until they come to rest in the lowest place, the comfortable hollow where the mind sets its weight and lets go. What resists in daylight can become companionable under blankets. Outside, the night continues to draft its own text. A commuter train far away takes a long breath before moving again. Wind, if there is any, turns pages in a tree. Clouds, if there are any, practice the soft arithmetic of rearrangement. Somewhere miles over your roof, the planet's magnetic field draws curtains of invisible silk toward the poles. In other latitudes, those curtains catch the light and turn it into green and red veils. Here they are only a rumor, but a kind one, like the rumor of rain on a dry garden. We have called Magnetars dangerous, not to wake you, but to tell the truth about nature's range, while restoring to the word its bookends, power and distance, drama and duration, the flare and the long calm after. The most dangerous star is also a study in mercy. It lives far. It mostly sleeps. When it does speak, it does so briefly, and what it says, when we listen carefully, is about how matter holds and yields, how stress gathers and is released, how even in the fiercest places the drive is toward balance. Let the science now become a quilt, patches of vocabulary sewn to patches of image, bordered by recurring comforts. Pine needles hold the dark. The lighthouse beam slides, unhurried. The watch, warm from your palm, ticks without needing attention. A city-sized star completes another slow turn. It is fine if it continues turning without you. For a while. It will. You can rejoin it later at another window on another night. If you're still awake by a fingertip, you might notice the smallest smile. We have taken a tour that ended where it began, under a quiet sky, amazed and reassured. We have learned to fold danger into wonder in a way that lets the body rest. We have seen that the universe, even at its most emphatic, prefers to be kind from a distance. The last light is the first sleep. The lamp in the corner lowers its own wick. The door to the universe stays ajar by an inch. Enough for a friendly draft, not enough for the weather. In that inch, stars continue their work, and the most magnetic tempests in existence become postcards you will read in the morning. For now, the porch is swept. The kettle remembers nothing. The bed is a good idea that carries itself out. Good night then, and let the dangerous stars keep their watch while you keep yours. From this small harbour, with your breath for company in the whole sky, kind, vast and far-standing guard.